I've done training for 30 plus years in this, and we've all heard it, right? Suppose I train my staff and they turn around and leave. Well, that's the chance you take. But the flip side is if you don't train them and they're in your practice, how much damage are they causing before you realize you need to make a step forward?
Mike Della Pesca is president of Quantum Optical. It's an educational and training resource group focused on opticians and staff. And Mike and I just chatted about how to drive optical performance in your practice. And guess what? He didn't just tell you to start barking orders to your staff in a staff meeting to sell more. Now, there's a process you need to have in place, a mindset. And Mike talks about how we can use that to drive second pair sales. You're going to love this topic. This is the Think Again podcast. Mike, I'd like to start by talking about your philosophy about training in our optical departments. I have this sense you feel that too many OD practice owners have not sufficiently trained their teams, although I know they give training. Can you talk a little bit about what you see in the market?
I can, Doc. Thank you. Training's out there, right? It's all over the place. There's like anything else. There's good training, there's bad training, and there's the training you have time for, right? Just parking somebody down in front of a book or a video isn't really training in my book. It's a good start. There's no such thing as a bad training protocol, but I think it goes deeper, especially when you get involved with some of the nuances that go into a dispensary. I think that you require a little bit more than just a book, a video, or somebody in the practice who may not be as strong in an area to do the training for you. It's like the blind leading the blind, right? So you wind up with a lot of turnover. You wind up with you recognize it in things like the patient care, patient handling, business management. So these things kind of fall apart. And with proper training, I can't guarantee all of it's going to be there, right? But you certainly stand a better chance.
Well, but yeah, so we put oftentimes our least capable employees in front of patients in the optical department.
Right.
How do you recommend somebody who's listening to this and says, "Yeah, I'm doing that," that they give some formality to their training process? Is it subscribing to services or systems? Is it looking for opportunities with alliances or somewhere else to get training materials or some sort of a performance plan in place?
It depends on where the weakness is. If you have somebody who, say, is your primary dispenser or running the dispensary itself, you may want to focus on optical knowledge, sales language and techniques, certainly patient handling, frame board management, versus somebody who's on maybe the technician side. You'd want more anatomy knowledge, a more understanding of pre-testing, refraction, eye diseases and disorders and things of that nature. So depending on where your staff is, you could focus. But let's just take the dispensary because that's where our focus of of our conversation is going to run. In the dispensary, you have a couple of different options. You have a lab network. A lot of the lab reps do have sales representatives that are knowledgeable when it comes to products and lenses and options and things of that nature. Index of refraction, things that go into that nature as well. You have frame manufacturers that can instruct on frame composition, frame materials, the hypoallergenic properties of stainless steel or titanium versus non-hypoallergenic properties of Monel. You have repairs of that nature. So a frame rep may be able to show you how to do simple repairs, and then along the way comes practice as well. So you could be taught something on day one, but that doesn't make you an expert. Constant reinforcement, constant training, constant practice in those areas make you the expert. So that's where I would see happening is, get the ball rolling, but certainly enforce those things with the resources that you mentioned, alliances. I work with quite a few of them, bringing our Pinnacle training program, the live program that we do, to their trade shows or to their clients and their customers. We put 20 people in a room and we spend 2 days teaching them everything they need to know about lensometry, patient interaction, and things of that nature. So the resources are out there, absolutely. They cost money, and that is the trade-off, right? That's what you're looking at is, am I going to get a return on my investment? And the answer is yes. If the training is done properly, yes. And it comes back with, you know patients being happier in the practice, patients spreading the word about you and your business to other potential patients, their family members, and also purchasing multiple pairs and things of that sort. So yes, it comes back to benefit the practice in the long term. You may not notice it in the short term, and that's what everybody's looking for, right? That I trained you yesterday. How come we're not selling 70% multiple pairs today? It's because it does take time to kind of bleed in.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I think a lot of us are concerned about training an employee that ends up being somebody else's employee
Hmm.
because we are used to turnover. But the idea of investing in these folks is that they become pillars of the practice.
Correct. We That was one of the things that we talk about when I've done training for 30 plus years in this, and we've all heard it, right? Suppose I train my staff and they turn around and leave. Well, that's the chance you take. But the flip side is if you don't train them and they're in your practice, how much damage are they causing before you realize you need to make a step forward? So, any training is good training. Moving the needle is better than not moving the needle. And if they leave, they leave. But what we found is that if you train somebody and they treat it more like a profession or a lifelong goal than a job, right? I'm just using this to punch my ticket until I find something better. That's how I got started. I didn't wasn't an optician. I wasn't planning on being an optician. I just kind of fell in love with the nuances of lab work versus the salesmanship in the dispensary. This is my home,
Right.
versus just a job. We've had lots of jobs, but this is my career. That's what I see happening with trained people.
Well, with that as background, I want to get to how we can help practices move the needle. And I want to talk about ramping up an optical team's ability to sell multiple pairs. It seems to me that typical OD business owners hold an office meeting, declare to the team, we're going to offer everyone a second pair. And that's it.
Rah
Uh,
rah.
it's not that simple, is it?
It is, and there's a lot of things that go into it besides besides kind of a pep rally first
Right.
thing in the morning at a staff meeting. You have to get the right mentality of the person that's selling, right? Or working your dispensary. Let's not use selling as the word because that's a four-letter word in some instances. But let's just say the person working the dispensary, their responsibility is going to be enhancing your multiple pair revenue stream. Okay, so how do we do that? Well, first you have the right person. Okay, if somebody's very shy or introverted, they can have the most knowledge you'd ever want when it comes to optical and frames, lenses, and lab. But if they can't really have a conversation with the patient, they're not, they may not be successful in this
They
endeavor.
could be better at dispensing completed glasses.
Correct.
Right.
So everybody's got their place in the dispensary. We have a lot of people, especially when the economy starts taking a downturn, right? A lot of people count their money and they look at it as if, well, I don't have any money, so nobody else must not have any money. So I'm going to be the nice guy and I'm not going to sell you more than you need, right? That's not an approach. That's every business that did that, they would die.
Right.
So that's not an approach you could take. So first off, the person needs to have be comfortable in what they're doing. You're not taking people's money. You are basically filling the patient's visual need requirement. That should be the approach you're taking. It's going to cost money, just like everything else costs money. So you basically need to take that approach that you're filling in a visual need. Now, how do you go about doing it? That's step one. Step two would be to put it back on the doctor, right? The doctor's going to run the staff meeting and say, okay, everybody's going to sell multiple pairs this year. It starts in the exam room. It actually starts before that, but let's just take the exam room as point A. When I say in the dispensary, I recommend, the patient hears, I'm selling you. When a doctor says I recommend, the patient hears, I'm prescribing to you. There is a bit of a difference. It's the same wording, but it's coming from the white coat versus the person up front, right? The person that's going to take my money. If a doctor says, I'm going to prescribe a progressive lens with non-reflective coating and a high index, so you have the thin, lightweight vision, et cetera, it goes into the details. I would be hard pressed to talk that patient out of it when they got to the dispensary. I can't see the conversation. Oh, the doctor doesn't know what he's talking about. You don't need all that jazz. I'm going to bring you down to the patient's going to push back and say, no, the doctor wants me to have it. So it does start in the white coat, and you prescribe uh, branded contact lenses, you prescribe the right fit, and you prescribe prescriptions. why not go the extra step and prescribe the material or the lens type or the enhancements that are on there as well? It's another conversation that happens in the exam room. And then we've talked about in the past transferring the authority from the doctor, walking the patient out to the dispensary. The doctor has the ability at that point to say, Mike, Mrs. Jones and I spoke about XYZ. Mike, Mrs. Jones, Mike, take it over. At that point, my job becomes quite a bit easier. Um, from that stage, right, the patient's sitting down more comfortable. Now I'm going to hit them up with a whole bunch of questions, and that's my job at that point, is to have a conversation. I'm not selling a patient anything. I'm trying to get some information out of them so I understand how they use their eyes, use their eyewear, and then recommend from that standpoint. So I'll talk to a patient, have a conversation. It's like anything else. If you get it into your head that one pair of eyeglasses does not solve every person's visual needs, just like one pair of shoes or one handbag or one belt doesn't meet every need for every occasion, then you can understand how multiple pairs become important. You're doing the patient a service by having these conversations. Not, you're not taking any money from them. You're giving them their solutions to their visual needs. I find that a more rewarding process than the sales numbers.
Yeah, that's very well said. I want to go back to the second point, the discussion about the doctor's involvement.
Hmm.
Um, I always believed, especially with the advent of electronic health records, that an optometrist should use the system to write more than one eyeglass RX if they're going to support multiple pairs. There's certainly different EHRs do it differently, and sometimes there's a little time involved. But if while you're talking to the patient, making these recommendations in the exam room, you can write the RX for the progressive with the AR, write a prescription with some sort of an RX that's got transitions for the golfer, and some sort of tinted gray or brown lens for sun. That, and there's a thousand other iterations of choices,
Right.
but that each of those prescriptions sits in the software as an action point that further calms the patient when they're getting told by the optician, we need to deal with these. Do you agree with that, or would you say that creates more confusion? Because it's just my point of view. I'm wondering what you think.
No, I think the more data, the better. You might have patients that it's really hard to pull their information out of them. They'll be more relaxed in the exam room than they would be in a dispensary, absolutely. So I think that is the point of contact right there. As a doctor has the ability to get as much info as, maybe not everything. There's a team effort involved, but the doctor has enough information there to write two or three prescriptions, recommendations, and then present it to the patient as, this is what you told me and here's my solution for you. And that's all we're doing, is filling your visual solutions. uh, when I have a conversation with the patient, when they finally get to the desk, to the dispensary, I am a little bit more conversational than most people, right? So I'll start talking to a patient and say, forget about the glasses for a second. Tell me what you do for a living, right? What do you do for a living? And they'll give me their occupation. And maybe I can relate to that. Oh, I used to work in a supermarket once, or my best friend's a postal worker or a cabinet maker or whatever. That relationship is what we're building here. So find something in common with the patient whenever they say something. That maybe they have a hobby that's very similar to something you do: knitting, cave diving, fishing, water sports, boating, whatever. I can relate to some of those. I don't cave dive anymore; those days are over. But when you have a oh yeah, I know somebody, or I did that, or I used to, or what is that like? You're not selling anything. You're talking to a patient, having a conversation, getting to know them a little bit. In the back of your mind, you're making notes, but at this point you're really just having a conversation. You haven't talked about anything yet. So I use a technique called reflective listening. It's very, very common, and it's very productive. And you'll come back at the end of that conversation and steer it back towards the eyeglass portion of the sale now. And you'll use things like, well, you mentioned that you spend a lot of time on your boat in the summertime. Let me see your sunglasses. And I don't have a pair of sunglasses. So that opens up a whole conversation to polarized sunwear outside of your day-to-day pair. And all we did was talk a little bit. And I
Mhm.
got to know you for, some doctors will say, well, you spend too much time with the patient. Well, it does pay for itself
Yeah.
at the end of the day in the bottom line. So the few minutes I spend doing a little extra chit chat is going to manifest itself into second pair sales. And the other part of it is if we can agree that everybody needs at least two pair, right? One pair does not solve the problem for every single solution for everybody. Can people get away with one pair? Yes. Can people get away with one pair of shoes? Yes. But generally speaking, you have multiple pairs for multiple reasons. So if we understand that, then your multiple pair sales rate should be 100%. Right? That would be the logical way to go there. Nobody's going to get that, but if your multiple pair sales are down to the 20 or 30%, you're doing something wrong. You should be up at about 50% would be my estimate. If you can do 50%, you're in good shape. If you're doing 10%, you move up to 20, you've doubled it, right? So you're not gonna go from where you are to over. But I don't practices that do, 40, 50% on a regular basis.
So you were talking about this sort of conversation, reflective listening. Those are essentially ways of talking about the inquiries to lifestyle. And some practices codify their lifestyle by questions up front, and they never follow through with those on the back
Right.
end because systems don't transfer that data very well. And patients really dislike it when you ask them in a form that they have to fill out beforehand what they do, and then you ignore it and re-ask the questions like, didn't you look at that? So any guidance you can give to people about, their formal or informal lifestyle inquiries and how those can translate into multiple peer sales?
Yes, and it's funny you brought that up. I was at the doctor last week, right? And the brand new doctor, brand new patient, not optical because I didn't
Yeah.
have to do that, right? I'm a medical doctor, and I spent good 15 minutes filling out all the paperwork, right? They handed me a clipboard, old school stuff, a clipboard with a pen and a string, and you're filling out the same information, your name, your address, your this, that, the other thing, and then they have the medical history and list all the medications that you're on. So I list a couple that I'm on there. The nurse brings me into the exam room and is going to verify everything. And she starts asking me, okay, tell me the medications you're on. Well, there's a piece of paper in that folder that, yeah, I don't want to hear from you. Then why did I fill out that paperwork? So I felt like this is going nowhere kind of thing. I just wasted my time. And already I have formed a mental kind of block on where this visit's going to go, right? The
Mhm.
doctor's going to come in and say, what can I do for you? My chief complaint is right there on page one. So nobody likes to feel like they wasted their time or they're being ignored and the information they provided. So when you ask me again, what am I going to tell you, right? I'm frustrated. So those forms are great if you're going to use them and say, well, I see here you like to do XYZ. Tell me a little bit more. That's great. If you don't do that and start asking somebody those questions, they're going to get a little resentful. And once that seeps in, then that suspicion is it just stinks all over the place, and nobody's going to make any headway. So if you're going to do a form like that, utilize it. Pick it out in front of the patient and say, here, you mentioned this. I see it right here. You do this or you do that. That tells a patient that what they did was worthwhile.
Another question I've got for you is related to the pricing structures. Now, the managed vision care plan thing's a whole different discussion, although we know that there's ways to leverage managed vision care plan benefits to do multiple pairs.
Mhm.
But I think we often think of selling patients all the pairs they need on a day. What I have never really heard anybody espouse, so I'm just kind of wondering if you have a point of view, is to whether we think about the patient in the life cycle of a year, and maybe that if they buy a pair, but they get a chance to try them, that as long as they come in, before some period of time expires, they could get that pair for the next lifestyle thing they need, and another pair later, and still reap maybe the financial benefits that we often give, where it's, if you buy them right now, you get 50% off. I know we want immediacy. I've never heard anybody do it as sort of a planned stepwise function through the year or two between patients' exams. What do you think of that?
I think that's the best way to do it, to be honest with you. I mean, if a patient's going to bite at on eye exam day, then so far so good, right? That everything's done. But sometimes you'll wind up with a little bit of resistance. You'll wind up with, gee, I don't have the money right now, and that's something you really can't argue with. Well, go find it, go make it. You only get one set of eyes. I mean, nothing's going to put more money in their pocket. There are options, right? You have the ability to do flexible payment plans through the dispensaries, through things like Care Credit or whatever's out there now. Whip out that Visa and you could put it on that and pay it off at 30% interest for the next 6 months if you like, that kind of thing. So you could, but you don't know somebody's financial situation. I use it as a touch point. If they're not going to purchase today, and I find that we're just going to no matter how much I recommend or whatever, the patient is interested, but just does not have the ways or the means to purchase them today, I'll make a note. I'll write down the frame. I'll write down what we spoke about. I'll stick it in their file. I'll let them know. Hey, is it okay if I follow up with you in 2 weeks, a month, whatever? Pick a time frame. First, I want to find out how your existing pair of glasses is working after you pick them up. I want to find out how these are working for you. Certainly offer at that point, come on in for an adjustment or things of that nature. So again, it's a touch point for you to communicate with the patient, but you can also extend that. I mean, 20% off now doesn't translate into any loss later. So if I was going to offer you 20% on sales day, then I'll carry it forward for 6 months or so. The incentive is to offer a bigger discount so you bite today.
Yeah.
I'd rather carry that sales incentive forward a couple of months. And if times change, you get your tax refund or you win the lottery or things shape up for you or whatever, uh, you remembered the conversation we had, how important it was to have that second pair or third pair or fourth pair, whatever it is, and now you have a couple of bucks, you're going to come back to me because I didn't pressure you. We all take that into consideration when we buy something, whether it's a widget or a doorknob or whatever the case may be. We go back to the people we like and we find the ones that treated us the way we expected to be treated. Those are the places we're going to go back to shop.
Yeah, you make a really good point about the shopper's emotional mindset, and you said it about the forms, right? If you don't pay attention to the data collection, then that just starts building this rising anxiety of I'm not in the right spot. But
You're
the
right.
more you do to put a person at ease, I have one other thought around multiple pairs, and that is that sometimes the way we inventory product, like we would like people to buy two $1,000 pair of glasses, but that's just sometimes actually baffling, right? I sometimes will buy a pair of shoes, a good set and kind of a beater set. And so I'm wondering if you have a point of view that you can give us about things like consignment inventories or house brands. Do any of those actually translate into increased chances of doing multiple pair sales?
It'll increase your revenue more than anything else. I don't know if it'll increase your second pair sales just because you have a white label frames or things of that nature in your frame boards. I think if patients are going to buy what they like, what they feel looks good on them, right? So at that point, it's not the money. We haven't talked about money. We haven't talked about pricing yet. So it's not the money that's the hurdle right now. It's the fact that it's going to add up to some money later in your mind. So if I can offset that by saying, hey, look, you don't have to buy them today. All I need you to know is that you should have them. If you want to save up for 3 or 4 months and get them, that's fine. So the shuffle on the boards with the frames and things of that nature, that just helps your bottom line, but I don't think it helps close a sale at any point.
So give us the last word. You've told us about mindset, talked about training, talked about meeting people where they are and their expectations. You're talking to the audience now. Tell them how they can do it as opposed to just declaring, you rah sell more.
Well, first off, make sure your staff is trained. If you don't have the resources, I can find you the resources, right? Anybody could. So make sure they have the knowledge because that does translate into selling from an expertise standpoint. Absolutely. So you just can't sell from the back foot. You got to know what you're talking about. Uh, the second thing is make the investment in your staff. Okay, so if they require more additional training or more help or whatever, recognize their positions. Okay, if your multiple pair sales are down and you have somebody who doesn't really like to talk to patients, you're really not going to build that multiple sales uh, avenue up if you don't have somebody out there who's willing to really chit chat and get into somebody's head. And third thing is watch it, track it, monitor. You can't manage what you don't track. So everybody says their second pair sales are down. Keep an eye on it and see what it is from week to week. And lastly, I would say is, there's no harm in incentives. And I know a lot of doctors are on the fence about commission-based things versus not, because then you start leading into sales that maybe weren't necessary. And so it leaves a bad taste in some people's mouth. But, if we hit our 35% multiple pair sales goal this month, lunch is on the practice for everybody. Make it a team effort. So not just reward the dispenser, make it a team effort, and let the whole practice get involved with it. And that's what I see being a benefit, not just one-offs like that.
That's very good. And to my doctor friends, write multiple prescriptions. Take the time.
Yes,
It won't clutter your database. You'll see on a date and time that you prescribed a number of things for a patient. It gives you a chance to talk about it next year as well. Did you get those computer glasses? Are you
right.
still having that issue? I just I really think that that's an untapped opportunity. So, Mike Della Pesca, thanks for being our guest on today's Thinking Again podcast.
Thanks, Doc. Absolutely a pleasure always.
Appreciate it. That's it for today's Think Again podcast, brought to you by GPN Visions, a peer-to-peer learning community to help grow your eye care business.